Thank you for joining. I know your time is precious, and I know it's important to get something out of these sessions. I really would like to encourage and respect the input from the room. I really appreciate the fact we've got 5 or 6 different sports represented here this evening, and that we have everyone from grassroots right through to international. So there is a lot of collective intelligence in the room. If I don't get any questions at various stages, I will start to pick on people, you know me. And I think some of the answers to our challenges lie in being specific, but it also means brainstorming some ideas and suggestions around what works and what doesn't work. So that's why we're going to talk about some tips, some tools, and some traps about how is it that we really engender, promote, engage with our teams to actually create better teamwork. And one word that I really want to stress in this session is the word together. So teamwork for me is all about being together. As always, I encourage you to take notes. I encourage you to try to identify your performance gap and think about your game, think about your team, think about how you can take you and your teammates just to that next level. And really just all that, one step at a time. How do we get better one game at a time, one season at a time? And then we all walk away from tournaments better officials than when we went into them. I know that Daryl Durham did a really good session with a lot of you in the room a little while ago on this subject. So Daryl talked about his 7 teamwork pillars being great communication, collaboration, initiative, visionary, being able to be adaptive, be constructive, and be organised. I'm going to give you a slightly different spin on that while still maintaining some strong alignment. So I don't intend to reinvent the wheel, but as always, we see things slightly differently through our own lens. And that comes from personal experience, but it also comes from learning from others. So this evening's about looking at some practical examples that I can share with you. And of course, we encourage other people in the room to share. That paradox of competition in the team, while still trying to generate team success, that individual pursuit of improved performance and selection, while having some competitive ego and juices in the room. It's really important that you not only compete with yourself, but you are aware of that outside competition, but not at the team's expense. And that is really difficult for some people to get their head around. So we're going to sort of touch on that tonight as well, which is really interesting. They're my 7: inclusivity, egalitarianism, know your role, trust, teamwork, support, etc., and agreed norms and values, that team first attitude, I should say. I'm going to reverse the order. And in doing so, when I looked at that 7 and I thought, where does it all start? Where does it start? And I was doing some work last week with another team around creating a culture of excellence and the componentry of that. And this is just a sort of a fundamental thing along with trust, but I thought I'd start at the end and go through that. So please feel free to interrupt and add some value here where you can. I'd like to start by talking about a case study. On the right-hand side of the screen that you're looking at the moment is an exercise that I did with pretty much a brand new team of match officials in the Major League Cricket event in the US last July. I had 5 umpires from the US that I'd never worked with before, didn't even know them as people, had some interaction with them leading into the event via emails and WhatsApp groups and, the odd chat on the phone. I had a guy out of New Zealand I hadn't worked before, international panel, a guy out of Pakistan that I had worked before quite a lot, and match referee that I'd worked with before. But here's the thing, major event, 19 matches, international broadcast, the first tournament in the US in this shape and form ever. So a lot of focus on the event and the tournament. And that's why we did this exercise face-to-face the first time we'd sat down as a group. And there's a bit attached to this. So it's not just about working on agreed team values and norms. It's about actually how do we get alignment? How do we get engagement? How do we empower the match officials to take ownership of how they want to work as a team? And so I did two things, two questions on a whiteboard, front and back. The first thing was this question: what do we want to achieve this season? What do we want to achieve this tournament? What do we want to achieve this season? Doesn't matter, it's the same old question. And these are not my words, it's the team's words. My role in this exercise was to simply facilitate, to engage like we're doing tonight, and to draw out. And to be non-judgmental through this whole process. So just shout things out at me. And we came up with almost a full whiteboard of what do we want to achieve. And then it was a case of, okay, let's narrow that down a little bit more and actually have some agreement. Which ones are the most important ones? Which ones do we really care the most about? And which ones are sort of saying the same sort of thing? So let's try to combine where possible. Now, as you can see, they're not things that we would be shocked to see on the board. We all get it, so I'm not trying to pretend that you don't know this stuff. You do. But I think that empowerment, getting them to take ownership of it is really the key. So I'm not going to try to teach you agreed team values and norms in this component. I think the real secret lies in the process. I think the real secret lies in the ownership, and then creating a very strong linkage and anchoring point back to what they said they were going to do and commit to. So that's why I'm sharing it with you. So none of that on the left-hand side, what do we want to achieve, should really come as a surprise. The second question on the right-hand side was, well, okay, what have we got to do? Let's be actions-based. Let's just not talk a good game. Let's actually deliver it. And we separated that between what have we got to do to actually nail that, between what we do in competition and out of competition. Because I think, again, like most things, when you want to try and get better, when you want to try and achieve something, the real answer lies in being specific. And when it came to the on-field stuff, again, these are their words, not mine. But sometimes I would take a concept that they were putting forward and I might just reshape it a little bit so that everybody might actually connect with it or understand it. So I love this one on field, see something, say something. Because one of the things that I find is pretty common with match officials is you might get to the end of a day or a match or whatever, and you're unpacking something, you're debriefing it, and someone in the team will say, oh yeah, I noticed that, but I didn't think it was noteworthy, or I was too afraid to put my hand up and let them know because I just thought they were in control of it. And I think it's a really powerful concept that if they see something that they think is not right, it's their responsibility, it's our expectation. How are we going to achieve team success? We create the expectation that if you see something that's noteworthy, that we should discuss, that we should perhaps do something about, at least raise it and let's deal with it. And if it's nothing, let's move on. Don't park it for later and say, I wish I did. Nothing worse. And that type of action is connected to some of the other concepts that we're going to touch on tonight as well. So remember that one, see something, say something. The other one I like that the group came up with is take ownership of my decisions and role. And the one underneath it, make decisions and support my teammates unconditionally. So out of competition, it might be okay to be selfish. It might be okay to be hungry and greedy with your development and your opportunities and your appointments of what you want to do. But while you're in competition, Mate, when we're together, when we put on the Superman suit and we're wearing the same uniform, if my colleague, I've got to try and do everything I can for the rest of my teammates to help them have the best game possible, because we all know that we're judged as a team. So we do that unconditionally. So whether I like them, I don't like them, whether I'm in competition with them directly towards the pointy end of the competition for a final, whether I think they're a good person or not, whether I respect their ability or not, when we are together, coming back to that word, we stick together. And that means pre-game, during the competition, and after it. It's about being together. Interesting enough, on the right-hand side, maybe some of you might connect with some of these concepts around behaviours away from the pool deck or away from the track. And it's a really interesting exercise about when we've got people together in an official team, because one of the common things that I see, and I've been part of it myself, and I'm guilty of it myself, is we sometimes just sit down and when we're having breakfast before a game or a day's play or a competition, there is a really strong tendency, possibility that you will find fault with your organisation. Oh, I wish they did that, or we're only getting paid this as a daily allowance, or, bloody laundry's a nightmare here, etc. So we tend to find fault with the organisation, or we find fault and start talking about other officials. And that's just a bit of a red flag. So I like the one ask for feedback, but more particularly, it's about implementing that feedback. And I think the language that we use is really important. So we did that exercise, and it took probably about an hour and a half to 2 hours. Reasonably quick, reasonably to the point. What we then did was, I had those sheets printed, I laminated them back to back. I got all of the officials who were part of the team to sign those sheets, and we stuck them up in the dressing room of our change room, and also in the TV umpire match facility, and in our meeting room at the hotel. So we got into the habit of having that reasonably visible in all of our group environments. Signing it was symbolic, obviously, because we took a bit more ownership, because when you sign something, you actually double check to say, okay, well, I'm happy with what I'm signing. And what it did for us is that every time, and I'm lucky that I had a guy from Australia and I had a guy from New Zealand, and when we started to see behaviours that stepped out the line of those agreed behaviours and norms, we had the courage at breakfast to bring it up, because we had a team meeting every day. And that takes a bit of strength, and it takes a bit of courage to call stuff out. And so one thing that I really encourage you to think about in this space to make it work is, what can we do, what can we say, because language is important, to be professional and not personal. I'll say that again. In everything that we do in this space around behaviours, norms, values, it's about calling out the behaviour, not calling out the person. It's about how do we treat these things professionally and say, sorry, I'm not quite sure that's up to our standard. That's not what we stand for. Let's bring that back into line. So what's really key with this is that when we have behaviour bracket creep, whether it's someone late for a meeting, whether it's someone saying something that's not constructive or productive, when it's someone not doing what we said we're going to do, is that we have this self-regulating, and I'm going to get to trust in a second, but I'm going to say it now, trust, where I'm free to say that, because we've created a safe environment where that's expected, because we're just going to be professional. And I think it's important to get all that stuff out on the table. And remember, the other thing I'd mentioned from my session last week with the culture of excellence for another group would be, it's important to be able to speak freely. It's important to be able to call stuff out, but creating a culture of excellence or creating a strong basis for your team is not a set and forget. It's not, let's just do it once and then we're okay. Or, we've done that exercise and everything will be right from here on in. It's not. It's almost like you've got to do this on a regular occurrence and constantly check back in with what you've already agreed, or alternatively, keep building upon it. Because that culture, that team environment, all the stuff we're going to go through shortly to keep building on this, is something that always needs constant maintenance and constant realignment, and maybe even constant improvement. Because new people will come in, some will exit, and some will exit for just natural attrition, but some will exit because they actually they don't fit, and they've used up all of their lives with the group. Any questions or comments on that? I hope that makes sense, and I hope that the sort of the case study is helpful to explain where the real value is around being specific and actioning how to get stronger as a team. Any comments or questions? Okay, happy to take more as we go in terms of when we get to a break. Support for others in the team. It sort of goes without saying, but I think what I'm getting at here is support is around creating a spirit. And that's why I've used that photo in that team shot there, is because that's a photo of myself and my team from the World Cup final 2011, the last time India won it in India. And I think it's important to highlight that word spirit, team spirit. We see it in playing teams like the All Blacks and in various football codes, where it's often the spirit of togetherness that allows you to rise above. So Queensland, state of origin, I think is a tremendous example as a playing team that seemed to lift as a group through spirit. And they do that a number of ways. That's pride in the jersey, pride in the uniform, pride in the logo and the people that they represent, always trying to talk up their teammates and celebrate the success of others. And it really is generally, and I spent a lot of time in camp, obviously, getting to know each other and to try to be able to play for your mate. I think in this space, it's really a case of, how do you generate some team spirit within your group, whether that's a social committee, whether that's really trying to continually lift your colleagues up in any way that you can. And I think don't feel afraid that by lifting someone up, that you're actually putting someone down. Interestingly enough, there is a word in the German dictionary called Schadenfreude, which is someone who takes pleasure from someone else's misfortune. And I see it sometimes in my sport, and I've seen it in others, where when they see one of their colleagues making a mistake, that somehow or other they take a little bit of enjoyment or pleasure from that, because they think if my mate's falling over, that's going to promote me and get me further up the pathway. Massive red flag. Massive red flag. Schadenfreude. It's interesting that there actually is a word to describe that. That's that type of behavior that you really want to try and nip, or you really want to try to say to that person, well, if that's the way you're going to behave, you're doing yourself no service, because you're actually we're not going to select you going forward as if you're going to continue to do that. And I wonder if you can actually create some group activities in your team to create a bit more spirit. So things like, well, what can the team members do in small groups to actually add value to the team? To research resources, to find out more about the past of the history of officiating in your sport, to obviously contribute, make and facilitate sessions of development, to lead by example in various areas around sharing. Those are the sorts of things that you can do to create more spirit. And does anyone else in the room have any ideas about how they're creating spirit amongst their officiating team?
Simon, I think it's important that we value everybody's contribution. And I think that is part of it. We're a collaborative team and everybody can contribute something. And I know in athletics we do that on a daily basis prior to going out on the field of play. The chief umpire conducts a meeting, and these are the sort of things that come up. We look at what went right yesterday, how can we improve today, any questions, and somebody might say, well, look, I put in this report, but the athlete wasn't disqualified. Why was that? And that's up to the referee to explain it. So I think it's that belonging that is really important to build the team ethos.
Yep. No, spot on, John. And I'm happy to jump around here because you raise an excellent point about valuing the contribution and the participation of every member in your group. And the only way that you can do that, again, is through action, because you can talk about this stuff. But one thing that I know, John, is that what kills culture faster, what kills the credibility of the message faster, is a mixed message. Is that when you talk about being inclusive and respecting people's individuality, and then almost persecuting them or discarding them at your discretion, they won't believe you, mate. So I think you're right about what can we do to actually live that inclusivity. And so when you actually are having a debrief, is what we do, John, and I'm sure you probably do it in your group, is you go around to every member and you say, okay, what are your thoughts today, Steve? What are your thoughts today, Billy? How do we go, Rudy? Shep, what have we missed today? What else do we need to talk about? Claire, any thoughts from you? Arlene, come on, you've been around for a long time. What do you think? If you had today over again, what would you do differently? And make sure that you create, again, this is what culture is. It's about our expectations and what's acceptable. So you create that expectation where everybody will contribute. We do expect everyone to contribute, and we actually provide enough oxygen in the room where people have got the opportunity to do so. And if we find that, Steve Buckner, top left there, he's a very reclusive, quiet individual and is very shy and non-committed individual in a team environment. We've got to draw him out. And then we've got a guy like Billy in the middle who is probably the other extreme, you can't shut him up, who's actually first cab off the rank and just wants to suck all the oxygen out of the room. And so it's a matter of, okay, Billy, thanks very much. We've heard from you. Rudy, what do you think? And I think that's where it just takes a little bit of sensitivity and awareness to manage the different personalities in the room. So who's being excluded? Let me give you a really interesting example about Alim Dar. So we might have a team dinner the night before a match. Obviously, a lot of guys and girls in our team are happy to have some alcohol. Alim's not. So we need to be sensitive to his faith, his religion, and not pick a restaurant or not pick a meal where we're mistakenly excluding him or making him feel uncomfortable. So again, you just need to be across that and maybe, again, shop it round the group, give them the ownership to say, okay, guys, well, where would you like to go for dinner? And to John's point around a debrief, let them take control of the post-match or the post-tournament discussion. When would you like to have that? Should we have it at the venue post? Should we go back to the hotel? Can we do it online, or are we out of time, etc.? Let them own that process a bit more. Let them take responsibility for that, and look for the outliers, the extremes, and don't forget to look for your internal champions. Steve Davis was a really good internal champion, just someone that people would gravitate towards. And Ian Gould the same way. You'll find people in your group who are naturally popular, is probably the best way I could describe it, that seem to have a relationship with everybody in the group. So sometimes as a leader, as a manager, we may not be in that lucky position. So you might want to think about, well, how can I use an internal champion to actually, generate some of that team spirit and that inclusivity? So, John, that's a really important point. Thank you for raising that. Have I covered that okay? Let me go back to, sorry.
There's a question from Sharad. Sorry.
Yes, Sharon.
Sharad.
Yeah.
Oh, Sharad.
Simon Sharad here. How you going?
Yes. Hi, mate.
Just a couple of things. I think going through some of the photos that you had earlier, one thing that really embodies team spirit and pride in what you're wearing is shirt numbers. I know in our sport we really value that, and then officials at the top level get that embroidered into their uniforms, and I think that instills a lot of pride whenever you don that shirt or whenever you see your number on a board or at whatever. But I think that's one way of recognizing team spirit, because you belong to something that's greater than just that game or just that tournament. And I think that's a really good way of recognizing that. Sorry,
Yep. No, thank you. No, that's a really great point. Anything else? Yep.
Yeah, so I was just going to say the other point I wanted to tag on with the last question was getting feedback out of people. It's not so easy whenever you've got changing teams. You're not standing with the same person, or you're not officiating with the same people, and sometimes inviting those comments might not be so tricky for certain people just because of their personalities. And one thing that I've seen really good operators within a team's culture is they get to know the people that you're working with, and in order to best support them, you really got to understand the person and what works for them, what doesn't work for them, and then be able to support them in a team environment so they can feel free and comfortable to speak up in such environments.
Yeah, really good point at the end there, Sharad. I love that, because one of the things that one of my previous match official managers talked a lot about was, how do we create a safe environment? And so to your point, Sharad, around, do I feel safe to raise a question? Do I feel safe to point a possible failure out? Do I feel safe to challenge the system? Do I feel safe to call out behavior that I don't like? Do I, like this picture, do I feel safe when I walk out with my colleague, when I come together as a group to do an athletics meet? Do I feel like my colleagues have got my back, or do I feel like they're waiting for me to trip over? Have I got an environment where I feel safe and valued and respected and appreciated? Do I feel safe that if I say something, someone's actually going to listen to it and just acknowledge it? It doesn't have to be always actioned upon. And I think if the answer is no to some of those questions, therein lies part of the opportunity to improve the teamwork environment. And it might be a really interesting exercise for you to do next time you get together with your teammates, with your match officials manager, and say, just to check in with them and say, how are we going? Do we actually feel safe as a group here and tight that what we say in this group stays in this group, for argument's sake? Or do we feel like we're under threat? Do we feel like someone's out to get us? Whether that's one of your own members who might be leaking stuff to a media outlet, or constantly looking for ways to undermine the group and destabilize the group. It's a really powerful question to ask, and it's something that I threw at a team recently, and I got a lot of silence. So if you can't say no, we're doing okay, there's nothing that we need to do to make ourselves feel safer, then I think therein lies part of your opportunity. Any other questions? Sharad, you still got your hand up? We good, mate?
Yeah, we're good.
There's one from Randall Simon.
Yes, Randall.
I think some of those points you've just raised are particularly pertinent to my sport in swimming. I mean, we can have 20 or more officials on deck at any one time. So providing that environment where people actually feel that they can have their voice heard, if they've got things that they wish to challenge or questions, can be really quite challenging at times. And in my organisation, we've actually moved to surveying our officials after a meet and providing them, because we typically have this situation where the meet finishes and there isn't necessarily a good chance for a debrief. They're usually very long days and people just want to get out and go. But then actually providing an option for people to actually fill in an online survey if they've been at a meet or at a championship, where they actually get to have their voice heard, and it's a safe environment in which we can actually then garner those questions that people have, take them to a committee, and discuss them. So we've found it's been really valuable so far.
That's really good. Thank you for raising that. I've also seen it work the other way, to be honest, where people hide behind anonymous surveys to actually just unload or blame or try to undermine the system because they're not advancing. So they've got an axe to grind. So this is their way anonymously to have a crack at someone or something. And again, not saying that that's always the way it is, but if you can relate to that in some way, I always think if you can't raise, again, be professional, don't be personal. Stab me in the front, don't stab me in the back. So if we're fair income about just focusing on how do we get better, and we have something also called respect, where we feel that we can raise it face to face and we can put the view forward. And again, we don't need to necessarily be judgmental at the time. Hopefully we can talk it through it. And maybe sometimes it's really healthy to actually get that stuff on the table and deal with it. And one thing that we did actually explore with our elite match officials in cricket was in our post-match debriefs, once we finish the debrief, if you haven't said something, then don't tell us after the meeting. Like, we've had the meeting, we've had the debrief. And if you haven't raised it, then you've had your opportunity. Now that takes some time, because sometimes, again, remember I said mixed messages. If you do that and someone shoots you down or someone has a go at you, well, are you going to do that again? Mate, no, you're not interested, and that's where it really comes down to consistency of action that's aligned to the behavior that you want. But no, look, you're really good. And I think it's important to always give people an opportunity. If nothing else, give them an opportunity. And that's why Simon's really big at the end of these sessions. Here's your opportunity to feedback. Here's your opportunity to improve it. What can we do better? And that's what it's all about. And I grabbed that photo for swimming because I just wanted to, again, try to be inclusive of all different sports in the room. But knowing your role is really intrinsically important to effective teamwork. Because I've seen it in my sport where people sometimes try to do the official's job for them at the other end, or there's a match referee or an assessor who might just be radio happy and actually, well, I've been a match official before, so if I see something that they should be doing, I'll get on the radio and tell them. And it's almost like, just let me do my job. So I think it's really important to respect people's space, not try to umpire or officiate or referee or officiate someone else's role or jurisdiction. I hope that makes sense. Has anyone got any examples of that and things that they might have done to try to curb that type of team behaviour?
I'm Sharad here. I just want to flip it that question on Ted. If you've got behaviours within your sport or within your teams, or you come across something like that, where someone's encroaching on your jurisdiction or your space, how do you deal with that? I just want to know from your perspective.
Sensitively. Again, it's about being professional, not being personal. And so, you might actually think about, well, what's my strategy here? Is it something that I can raise face-to-face with them? Or depending upon your relationship with them, you might not be the best one to do that, particularly if you're the inexperienced partner in that competition, and someone who is a lot more experienced. So I'm trying to move away from junior versus senior because that has connotations. So labels are really important in this space. So there are a number of things, Sharad. I think about, when's the best time to talk to them about that? Am I the best person to raise that? Or what language can I put that in And do I feel safe enough to be able to express and say, look, I really didn't like the way that I was talking to that player and you came in over the top and took over. You know, that really compromised my credibility and position because I felt like I was in control of the situation and I felt like you just basically, you know, pushed me out. Do you understand how that might feel? And again, language is quite important because that can spiral very quickly into who's right and who's wrong, or if there's massive ego in the relationship or in the individual, you just want to pick your moment with that. It's no different to charade. You think about when you've got to talk to a player who's actually doing something wrong, pick your moment, pick your strategy, pick your target, pick your time, and think really about what is the best way for me to get this message through to change their behaviour. There's no right answer here, mate, but I just think you've really got to, it's almost like strategy over substance a little bit. And maybe there's another person who you could actually have a talk to and say, look, you know, or bring them into the conversation, you know, not ganging up on him, but can we just talk through how that looked off the field? How did that come across? A couple of ideas and suggestions for you. And of course, if anyone's got any, if you want to deep dive into that stuff later on, I'm happy to have offline conversations with people as well. But please know your role. Where am I up to? Egalitarianism.
Simon, there's just a question. I think you've basically covered a fair bit of this question.
Yep.
In your response to the previous question, but it's coming through the chat. I know David and Katrina have their hand up, so yep. I'll just read the question out. If you guys keep your hand up as well to ask something else. But the question was, any examples of how you've responded to people who are either dismissive of others and or are very confident in their own opinion?
Yeah, certainly some examples around ego. I think it's a case of getting to know them a bit more. I think it's a way of finding a connective point. And also too, if you conflict within your team with someone who's got massive ego, it's really important to stay focused on the topic of discussion, not focused on the person or their attributes. So again, language is really important here because it will always slide into what have you got against me? You're telling me I'm wrong? And so there's a credibility argument that comes into it. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm not saying that, you know, you made the wrong call here. Or I'm not saying that I disagree with you, but can you tell me why you think we should do it that way? What's your reasoning behind not blowing that up, not penalising it? Or why do you think we shouldn't continue this competition at this point? Why do you think it's too dark? Why do you think it's unsafe? And keep it very factual and very, very matter-of-fact-ish. And there will be a tendency for them to slide in other areas and say, mate, you've done this to me all day, or you've got something against me, what's the problem, etc. So nothing against you, mate. You know, but I'm not quite sure we actually are headed in the right direction here. So can you give me your reasons as to why you want to go this way? And again, that's just a way of really being professional. You are going to find, particularly the further you go up the officiating or pathway ladder, you're going to find definitely more ego in your colleagues. And this is why it's a really important concept around team success. And so I'll go back to the slide on team success and deal with it. So, of course, we want to make sure that we're all rowing that boat in the same direction, that the team is moving together. And if we've got someone who's destabilising that, someone who's holding us back, someone who's not actually in sync with what we're trying to do as a group, and again, here are your anchoring points. Here you go back to your agreed team values and norms. And if you see someone who's dominating rather than officiating, if you see someone that you can't get on with in your team, we go back to our agreed team values and norms and say, look, can I raise something with you? Are you happy to have a conversation about our teamwork? And see where that leads. And so let me give you some examples. So how can you set yourself up for success with individuals like this? How can you start to build more of a relationship bridge around officiating relationship, or getting to understand what's going on in their world at the moment, or what their triggers might be and what they want from you. And so again, if you lead from this type of behavior, pre-competition, pre-match, whatever, and you ask the question, what can I do to help you have your best officiating today? What do you want from me? What can I do to help you have the best performance possible? Where do I fit into that? And they should give you an answer. And one would hope through mirror behavioring that they're more than likely going to ask you the same question. And if they don't, then at least you've opened the door to say, well, okay, would you mind helping me out today by doing the following? And some of that might be related to that dominating effect, you know, and again, you just got to package that in a really non-confrontational way, in a way that you're being professional, not personal. So again, I've got some questions on the screen here and some ideas that might actually help lead towards dealing with problematic partners or people in your team. You know, so language, talk about we and us. What do we need to do today to have a good game? What do we need to do to make sure that we're not noticed? Do you mind if we sit down at the end of the competition and actually have a chat about some of these things? And you can see that I've steered away from senior and junior. I think doing things together. So if you see your mate and your colleague walking off to actually have a conversation with a captain or a coach, tag along. And maybe raise it and say, is there a reason why you went off and chatted to that captain without me? What were you talking about? Again, just be really sensitive to prejudging some of that. With people with ego, I found a really interesting strategy around pumping their tires up, stroking that ego. You know, so try to warm to their better side by pumping their tires up and saying, look, you've been around for a long time. Do you mind if I tap into some of that experience from time to time? You know, so you don't necessarily have to lie to them or to pretend things aren't the way. But I find that if I'm dealing with people who have a very high opinion of themselves, when you tell them that they're good and that you respect their experience and their ability, they're more likely to come with you. They're more likely to actually have that working relationship. You don't have to lay it on really thick because people will start to see through that. But praise and stroke that ego where you can. So look for opportunities to lift your colleague up. That was a really good day. That was a really good session. That was a really good decision. I liked the way you dealt with that individual over there. That was great. Those sorts of things. Does that help, Simon? Have we answered that question?
Yeah, I think so, Simon. That was good.
Excellent. Let me move on to trust because I know time is short and I'm really pleased that people are asking questions. So hopefully we might have a couple more as we sort of move towards the end. Really connected with agreed norms and values is this concept of building a foundation of trust within your team. It's a little bit what we talked about around being safe. But I love this picture. I love this, again, walking out together. It's about, I feel free to perform the way I want to perform because I know the people that are around me are on the same page. Now, this is not about preparation so much, it's about positioning. It's around positioning yourself to make your competition or your day easier. So it's almost what you do in the lead up. So when's the last time you did something with them outside of competition in a non-threatening environment? What did the pre-match or pre-tournament discussion look like? What's my relationship with them in meetings and officiating workshops and seminars and training events? You know, have I extended the officiating friendship? I don't have to like them. I don't have to be their best mate, but have I established a bit of an understanding, a bit of a connection, or do they see me as a threat? So whenever you're not in dialogue, whenever you're not able to have a conversation with someone, that will automatically lead to a bit of fear and maybe a little bit of distrust. So I think whatever you can do to show other people your true character, and I think intrinsically everyone's good. So if you can show the good side of you, if you're able to share your experiences and give them the genuine want for them to do well, you're giving yourself at least the opportunity that that's going to come back to you. Really important around trust. So let's, again, just other examples. So again, number 3 here, never criticize your colleague or undermine them to players or others. That is just a massive mixed message. So Sharad might have heard this before. We've talked about corridor talk, and I mentioned it up front around talking about colleagues behind their backs. Ultimately, that gets back to people. Ultimately, it gets back to people. You don't think it does? Well, it does. Togetherness. Togetherness helps build trust. It's really simple as that. Out of sight, out of mind. And again, if you're a match officials manager or you're a senior member of the group, then for those of you that might have worked in a factory environment like myself, walk the shop floor a couple of times. Manage by walking around. Move around the troops. Who haven't I spoken to recently? How are they travelling? Are you okay? Very simple questions, very simple touch points. If somebody's not doing well in your group, personally or professionally, reach out to them. Are you okay? Is there anything I can do for you? 99% of the time, they're going to say, I'm okay, or no, it's all right, but thanks very much for touching base and reaching out. It's a little thing that can often mean a lot. Just be on top of those little things that can mean a lot to other people. For those of you that don't know, Claire Polisak today is making her first class debut as a match official in Perth. Her match officials manager from New South Wales has travelled all the way to Perth just to be with her today. That sends a massive message of trust and support. Not only that, a note's gone around to all of our members to celebrate and acknowledge that massive achievement in our sport around women's officiating in men's competition. I guarantee you that you've probably got 1,000 messages today from our 2,000 members. That helps build a trusting environment. Touch on just a couple of others really quickly. In fact, probably this is the last one I need to touch on because I think I've dealt already with inclusivity. Egalitarianism. This is not about treating people fairly. This is about treating your match officials team and its members equally. So things like your pathway. Is your pathway fair for everyone in terms of equal opportunity? So it's performance-based. So I know that if I do these things to an excellent standard, I give myself the best opportunity of being selected. That the pathway is transparent. I can see it, touch it, feel it, understand it, know it. It's there. That when we put our shirt on that was referred to earlier, we have pride in our shirt. That we're equal. That there is no senior, there's no junior, we're equal. And we have equal responsibility, equal opportunity to officiate. And as members of the team, and some of you may connect with this, is that sometimes as a team member, you'll lead from the front if you've got someone with less experience. And that same person, sometimes you'll lead from behind and give them the opportunity of being the front person in some team discussions or in handling some important situations so that they're seen to be, you know, the top dog in the group or the top dog in the team. And similarly, when you are considering opportunities for contributions or responsibility in leading the group, that you share that around. That you really look for opportunities to let people grow and to stretch them. So it is related to inclusivity. So I'll finish on that note and just really get you now to consider, what can you do to add value to your team in this space? Are you doing some of those things really well? Is there one or two things you might want to focus on? Is there something in that you can take back to your match officials manager and say, maybe we should give this a try? Or maybe this is our blockage in holding the team back. Whether it's a person who might be holding the team back, whether it's a process, or whether it's, a mixed message that's holding the team back. So with that, I'm happy now to just finish that and then open it up for conversation.
Just two things, Simon.
Sorry, Jacqueline.
Looks like we have a question from Jacqueline.
Yep.
Just checking in. We're always making sure that everyone else is looked after. We go around the pool, we check on everyone, make sure they're having breaks and things like that. We've also got to remember to look after ourselves. That's one big thing that I have to make sure that we do on pool deck, and it's great that we check on everyone and we always do that, but you've got to make sure it's not to your detriment, because that will make you not perform as well.
Yeah, a little bit. And so it's a great point you raised, Jacqueline, around sort of the aeroplane oxygen mask theory, that when that oxygen mask drops down during the safety briefing, they say, look after you first before you help others, because if you're not in control and you're not feeling good, and if you're not healthy and you're not in a fit mental state, then your ability to support other people is severely compromised. So, yeah, great point. Thank you. Anything else in the chat box? Questions, comments?
No, nothing so far.
Just one thing, Simon, just to finish off. I think all of that, what you've said, it really gels with all of us, I'm sure. But one of the things I get, I'm very conscious of when there are new officials on my team, the same as you did with Alamdar, I like to know what they do away from athletics, because that can have a big influence on how you treat them, and especially in areas of responsibility and the sort of how much support you need to provide them. And I just think the main thing, and coupled with that, is we don't set people up for failure. We're a team, otherwise it destroys the team ethos.
No, and you're right, John, and getting people to really connect with that concept that we are judged as a team. So if we have a member of our officiating team that is under pressure or being singled out or being not victimised so much, but really being given a hard time, we need to rally around that individual and protect them in some way. And that's not to say that we defend the indefensible, but what we do is we're tight. We're tight, and it's that team spirit. But I loved your point around getting to know the other person, and we might have sort of touched on that a little bit around spending time with them outside of competition. Where do you live? How far do you travel? How many kids have you got? What do you do for a job? Why did you take up officiating? How far do you hope to go? Just take an interest in them, and a little bit goes a long way. Great point. Thanks, John.